So today we're working on a 2008 Ford Escape. It's been making some noises in the back. I suspect they're wheel bearings. What's weird is that there's a test you can do where you just kind of, as you're driving, move to one side real quick and it shifts the weight, taking it off of that side. And if the noise goes away, it's indicating that it's that side. This one's a little bit weird. It actually, if you do that to the driver's side, the noise goes away, indicating it's the driver's side. But the noise in general comes from here, the passenger side. So just a couple preliminary tests here. It's not a foolproof test. Essentially, it's if this shows me something, it does mean it's bad. If this doesn't show me something, it doesn't mean it's good. We'll have to look into it further then. But essentially, this is the all-wheel drive model. And if this bearing is completely bad, it would be wobbly and shaking. But because it's all-wheel drive, the axle nut has that bearing kind of clamped down. So right now what I'm going to do is I want to loosen the axle nut and then see if my tire shakes around. I should probably spray something on there. This is an old car and it's in northern Michigan. So there's a lot of rust up on the threads. So I'll probably do that before I try to take the nut off any. So now I'm going to loosen the axle nut here and then see if it wobbles. That's plenty loose enough. And if it's bad, which I suspect it is, this tire is probably going to wobble all over the place now. That tire wobbles all over the place. So we definitely got to get that wheel bearing on the way. So for right now, I'll tighten it back up. You definitely do want to use a torque wrench to actually do this, but a lot of that is to save the wheel bearing that I clearly don't care about right now. Okay, so it's been a few days. We finally got the new wheel bearing in the mail, so we're going to be putting that in here today. I figured I'd start by going over a couple of tools that you're going to need. First and foremost, the most important thing that we're going to be using today is jack stands. I have several of them under it. Always make sure that it's supported. Yeah, we're going to be moving a lot of stuff around underneath there. It's going to shake the vehicle a little bit. Needs to be secure. We can't have that falling on us. If it can't be done safely, you don't do it. So those are definitely the most important ones. Other things we have is these are press-in style wheel bearings. So I have this here, which is an on-car press. Has all those different size adapters, and then essentially a giant bolt that you just tighten in to press it in or out. I also do, way over in the corner, have a little shop press. If that one doesn't work down there, I can pull the entire trailing arm off and use that. Hopefully this works though, it's a lot easier. Then to pull the wheel hub out of the bearing, you need a slide hammer. So, got that stuff, and then just other basic tools, wrenches, sockets. I'll be using an impact a lot because I have one. You don't have to have it though, it could be done with just normal tools. So I guess we'll start by getting the tire off. Okay, so a lot of this stuff here doesn't really have to come off in any real particular order, but I have to take the shocks off. There's these two supports, I guess you could call them control arms, but they come here to the back. There's one top, one bottom, hooking up with a ball joint type fitting. Those have to come off. There's a bolt at the front of the trailing arm here that has to come off. The brakes I probably don't have to remove entirely, but I would imagine I probably will have to at least bend the line a little bit just so I can move it enough. And you gotta be careful because there is a coil spring here that's going to become unloaded at some point. Like I said, no particular order, just gotta start taking stuff. I started with the axle nut. No real reason, just did. This brake drum is going to have to come off. This one's seized a little bit. I'm going to start with a rubber mallet and hope that it works. And I do believe it will. You don't want to hit these too hard. A lot of them are cast and they will just shatter. You can definitely tell that wheel bearing's got a lot of play. The camera probably doesn't show it, but I can shake it all over the place. My CV axle does appear to be a little bit stuck in there. So what I'm probably going to do for that, and I'm doing it while everything else is still hooked up, I'm going to put the nut back on it, and then get some sort of metal hammer, something a little more powerful than the rubber mallet, and just kind of hit this. Once it breaks free a little bit, it'll be free. The rubber mallet, I just don't think is quite going to give me enough to do it. It is not.
That's definitely not a sledgehammer.
It is on this side.
I mean, it is on that side.
There, that's freed up a little bit. The jack can be a very useful tool with this. It can serve to hold up stuff just temporarily. It can also load or unload the tension on the suspension here. I'm using it to hold a stud in place on one of these ball joint fittings. Worst vice grips ever of vice grip. Okay, we're 5 minutes in and we're already getting the torch. I didn't mention the torch and the tools we were going to use today. And I guess that's my fault. Because I live in the Midwest, which means that everything needs a torch. Just going to try heating the nut up to expand it. And then it should come off a lot easier. Should go without saying, but make sure you don't have a fuel leak or proximity to anything like that. In this one, the bigger part of the gas tank's on the other side along with all of the fittings. There's a small amount up front here I have to watch for, but not back here. And another thing that should go without saying, but I'll say it anyways, don't touch that now. Okay, unless I have to take it off, I'm going to leave the top of the shock hooked up. I really just had to take the bottom off just so I have full travel with the suspension. Okay, what I have here now is a assortment of, well, tie rod separator tools, pickle forks. All different shapes and sizes of them. I guess they're all the same shape, but different sizes of them. I'm going to try to just put tension on here. This is not the way I would prefer to do this, because you do risk ripping a little grease boot down there. So I'm going to be as careful as I can. If it does happen to rip it, then I'll deal with that later. Okay, I probably actually should have done this part before I unhooked some of that, but I have to use the slide hammer to pull the hub out of the wheel bearing. You do have to take the axle nut off before you can do this, and then this is probably where I should have done it, because this is now going to shake as I'm trying to use my slide hammer. But it should work. If I have to, I'll hook the other stuff back up. So, just using this adapter here, whatever one fits best. And I'm using the actual lug nuts from the vehicle to hold it on. and just a whole lot of that. They're actually usually a lot more difficult than that, so be thankful for that. I did the other side of this vehicle a couple months ago, and I was probably hammering on it for half an hour. The wheel hub just comes out just like that. Just smooth part here. Wheel bolts there. The splines are inside for the axle. So I had a cart in front of the camera, so I'm going to edit that part out here. But I needed my torch. Once again, Michigan vehicle. In order to get enough movement on this rear trailing arm to get the CV axle out, you have to pretty much take everything. And this front bolt up here can be a real pain. If any of you at home are doing this on your own vehicles, I would highly recommend just ordering that bolt. It's like $45 on Rock Auto, which sounds like a lot for a bolt. It is a special bolt, though. It's for the alignment. This side I actually was able to get out, but it took a lot of hitting it with the impact, wrenching, actual hammer, heat from the torch. But I did get it all loose. It's about to come out now. It's still kind of seized, but I'm able to spin it around and pry, and it's making its way out. Bolt. Okay, so I think I explained the tool a little bit when I was first going over it. But essentially, there's just a bunch of adapters here, and a bunch of different sizes also of adapters. They're numbered. I guess it's probably a part number to replace them if something happened. But essentially, you figure out which way it's going to press out. At this point, it's a bad bearing. You don't have to be real careful on where you hit it. On the way back in, you do, and I'll explain that as we go. So I just found the biggest one that I could to get the most surface area on the bearing. This one presses out through the back. So on the back, I have an empty tube similar to this that just fits around. It's bigger than the area that the bearing has to come out, and it's on a nice flat surface on the back. And then I have a flat plate. There's a big bolt that runs all the way through it. And so essentially when I try to tighten this plate on the front against that plate I put back there, it will press anything in between them outward. So I'm going to have to hold the back and tighten this, and it should force it out. Okay, I did misspeak earlier when I was doing this. Luckily my wife was here to correct me. You know, as long as we have one person that knows what we're doing. This bearing presses outward. The snap ring was here. It goes against a flat in the back. The bearing comes out this way. So we're making some progress now.
It's been a minute.
Since I'm the one editing the video, you'll have no idea how long, but...
Long enough.
Not long.
Not long, but long enough.
It was long.
It was long.
Okay, that either popped or it just stripped again. Now, whenever possible, it is a good idea to compare your new parts to your old parts, but my old part is kind of laying all over my garage floor in a million pieces now. So, it looks right. I can sort of compare it to the hub. It's an interference fit, you know, it does press in, but it seems like it would fit pretty closely. And over here, same thing. It looks like it's going to fit closely. I can check the width with the old one. As far as all that I can tell, this appears to be the right bearing. And it's the right part number. So, you know, that's always a good test too. Now, I may have some trouble trying to get this in here. Because I broke my tool. But we'll see what we can get done, and if not, I guess we'll make a trip to the store tomorrow and get myself a new tool. I can give a couple taps just to kind of get it started in here and make sure it's straight. They won't press in sideways no matter how hard you try. But when you're doing this, one, make sure you don't damage anything. If you leave marks, it's going to cause your problems later on. And two, make sure, since we're pressing the OD of the bearing into the spindle here, we have to make sure that we only press on the OD of the bearing. If we press on the inner part, it side loads it and you can ruin the bearing. That seems like it started pretty well. My tool is kind of stripped, but we're going to try it anyway. see what we can get out of it. I was hammering on this earlier, so before I actually get it stuck on there again, I'm going to grind off the mushroom part. So I'm going to attempt putting the nut on here backwards, because it gets a different spot of the threads that's only partially damaged. Those aren't great odds, but they're all I have at my disposal tonight.
Looks a little better.
Just strip it.
Alright, I guess,
Well,
does that mean we're done?
It got us that far. Unfortunately, that's all my tool is going to get me tonight. I have good threads down here where no threads are useful at all. I have found little... I've done things in a lot of ways that weren't exactly right in the past, and a lot of times it does work out just fine, but I do risk ruining the bearing if I do that. I've seen other people where they do it, mess something up and it seems good now, they drive a couple 100 miles, it starts making noise. I don't have the right tool tonight, so I'm just going to stop where I'm at. So that is all we get to do tonight. Okay, so I replaced the part of my tool that I needed there, so we were able to get everything pressed back in. Just a quick reminder on that part there. It's just I didn't really film it all up close, but essentially it's just make sure that you're supporting the part of the bearing that you're actually working with. If you're pressing the hub in, it goes into the center of the bearing, so support the back of the center of the bearing. But we've got that in there. That's pressed. So most of these connections here are still loose. The very first thing we have to do is put the axle back in, and everything else can kind of be put back together in whatever order we get to it as. So that's what we're going to start with, is the axle. That is tight.
Okay.
Probably should tell the camera about that.
Probably.
Okay, so a problem I just encountered here, and I had the same problem when I was taking it apart, but I was able to get by it then, is these ball joint type fittings. Essentially, you take the nut off of them, because it's tapered into the hole there. If the ball joint stud comes out of any of this, then the stud just spins when you try to take it out. Most ball joints that I've dealt with usually have like a small hex head on the very tip of that stud that you can hold with a wrench while you tighten the nut. Here in Michigan, I don't even have very good luck with any of those, because once they rot out a little bit, then the wrench just slips. And usually they're real small, like 8 or 10 millimeter anyways. These just didn't even have that hex. It was just a stud that came out. So my only real hope for holding it still was to get the tapered part of the ball joint stud down into here. Just the friction, I guess, from that and being compressed down in there holds it still. I was having some trouble with it, but what I ended up doing was using a ball joint press, which is essentially a very heavy-duty C-clamp. I went around the top of the ball joint here. You don't want to push down in the center because you will damage it. But I went around the top of it and pressed down in there. The other side of the C-clamp has a giant hole in it that I was able to fit my socket through to tighten that nut. So I pushed the stud down into where it goes with the clamp and held it there while I tightened that with the socket. Now I'm going to take that back off and keep going. So pull this up here just to show you. Basically, heavy-duty C-clamp, this tightens. Put my socket up through here, and it was able to get the nut. And then this here went over the top around the ball joint. This piece here fits into that so that it can go onto the clamp. Yeah, I think I broke that over there. The 10 mil made it out. So we do have to torque this still, but we can't really do that until it's on the ground. Okay, so I have everything back in there and bolted. I have the axle nut on. That's the only thing I haven't actually finalized on here. Everything else is hooked back up in where it's supposed to be. I knocked the center cap out of the rim here. There's a special torque for the actual axle nut in there. In the past, I have definitely just cranked it down until the impact said it was tight. And I've never had a problem with that, but there is a torque spec, and I finally did buy a torque wrench a couple of years ago, and been using it since. It's just a good idea because it does set the load on the bearing a little bit. So in order to do that accurately, I'm going to put the tire back on it so that it doesn't spin as I'm torquing it down. So that's why I knocked the center cap out so I can still get my socket in there. So got that torqued down, just gotta put the center cap back on it. We'll go take it for a drive, see if the noise is gone. It ought to be. The other bearing was absolutely toast. It fell apart as I was doing it. I mean, the tire shook all over while it was still on there. So we got all that done. We went and took it for a test drive just to verify that the noise was gone. And it is. It sounds nice, quiet, smooth. All in all, it's a success.